Everyone has suffered that overwhelming feeling of not knowing where to start when it comes to revision, especially for content-heavy subjects like the sciences. Being bombarded constantly with revision resources and recommendations by your friends, teachers and parents is pretty overwhelming, and it only worsens this paralysis by analysis. Hello, welcome back. It's been a while. If you're new here, my name is Arnav. I'm a student based in the UK, and on this channel we explore the strategies and tools that students can use to lead more productive and enjoyable lives. In this video, I'll break down the simple foolproof strategy that I use to get consistent predicted grade 9s throughout year 9 to year 11 in all of my sciences, while outlining the best revision methods and resources that I use to save you time so that you don't need to go and look for them yourself. So I'll break this video down into 4 key sections. First, understanding all of the content, then memorizing it, then practicing some exam questions, and then finally I'll give some subject-specific tips and advice for biology, chemistry and physics on their own. As always, the timestamps will be on screen now, and you can also skip between the YouTube chapters in case you want to do that. So let's get straight into the understanding stage. So one of the most important and first steps that you should really be doing is opening your subject specifications. So for instance, for biology, if you do Edexcel or AQA, you want to go to their website and then open up the full PDF and make sure that you are familiar with it, because it's really one of the most useful resources that all of the top students use, because it gives a very detailed and comprehensive outlook into anything that they can ask you in your exam. They can't ask you anything that's not on the specification, so make sure you are familiar with it. Using the specification, list out your weakest topics for each of the sciences and do a ranking on which topics you think are your weakest, the ones that you haven't revised in a long time, or you're least confident with answering questions on. So for each of your weak points on the specification, you want to make sure that you're reading good quality notes and also watching YouTube videos. In terms of notes, I would suggest using platforms such as Save My Exams, Physics and Maths Tutor, My GCSE Science, and Cognito. My personal preferences are Save My Exams, and I've also heard that My GCSE Science is also really good. Save My Exams is a paid subscription, not sponsored or anything, but I would really suggest getting Save My Exams, especially if you're aiming to get a grade 9, because they have very detailed notes. You just need to make sure that you stick to what's in your specification. They tend to be quite good at doing that anyway. For videos, I would definitely suggest Free Science Lessons and also Cognito again. They're both great revision resources, and if you are short on time, then a little trick is to watch the videos at 1.5-2 times speed, because you can just get through things much quicker, especially with subtitles on, and especially if you're cramming for an exam the next day. Another very important resource that you want to be using is your exercise book, and that's why it's very important throughout the year that you're making detailed, clear notes that you can use later on, because after all, these notes that you make, they're written in your own words, and you've sort of made them as understandable for you as possible. So you want to make sure that you do use those and you don't waste them and only use online resources. For example, here are some of my biology notes that I took throughout the years, and I'll be honest, biology were the best notes that I made out of all the sciences. But make sure that you are making good detailed notes for all of the subjects. It can really help in the long run, and if you develop the habit of creating really good notes, then revising for tests in the future will just be much easier. And then finally, for the content that you still feel that you're not that confident on, you want to make flashcards, and that leads me on to stage 2, which is the memorization stage. Now, for the memorization stage, I would highly suggest using a platform such as Anki or Quizlet. My personal preference is Anki. I have a whole tutorial on how to set up and use Anki up here somewhere. If you want to check that out, then please do so, because it's a really useful resource that if you use it in the long term correctly, it's absolutely insane. It's a game changer. Now, it's very important that you make and use these flashcards, whether they're digital or physical, in a specific way. Firstly, make sure that you're not making flashcards on absolutely everything in your specification, on every spec point. I almost made this mistake myself, because I tried to make flashcards for all of the content. I thought that would be a good idea. For the sciences, I ended up not doing it, and I would highly suggest that you don't do it as well. Make sure that you make it on the difficult content, or the content that you find moderately difficult or moderately difficult to memorize, which is the key thing. Don't make it on the stuff that you already know and you feel very confident in and you feel like it's quite easy, because honestly it's just a waste of time and it's just repetitive and boring. The next thing that you need to be sure of when you're making your flashcards is that you're not copying or even summarizing notes from your exercise book or from online straight onto your flashcards. Make sure that you are creating new rephrased wordings. Also, make sure that you try to minimize the number of words on your flashcards. Trust me, it will help so much in the long run. You don't want to be looking at these flashcards in a few months' time and looking back and seeing whole essays on the flashcards that you're just not bothered to read. Try and cut it down wherever you can to make the flashcards as succinct as possible while still having as many key terms as you possibly can fit in there, because obviously in the mark schemes they love seeing key terms no matter what board you do. So make sure you get in as many key terms in as few words as possible. If you follow all of those tips for creating flashcards, then you'll fully be able to harness the benefits of active recall and spaced repetition. If you don't know what those are, then you can check out my Anki video again. I do mention those and explain them. Here are some sample flashcards that I've made on Anki. They can range from some very simple definitions, so you can see one here, and they can go all the way to much more complex and more detailed flashcards that summarize whole processes. I would suggest that you don't make flashcards that are too complex, of course, because then they end up just being notes rather than flashcards that you should be able to go through quickly. Many of my longer flashcards use the close technique, and you can check out my video for that again. Essentially it just blanks out part of a paragraph or part of a sentence and you have to fill it in your head, and then obviously you're recalling that information, and it's really useful in the long term. Right, so let's move on to section 3, which is doing exam questions. It's one of the most important stages in your revision. Please do not skip it out. If you do have time, then try and do as many as possible. So where should you go to find these questions? Well, there are a bunch of places online. Your teacher or your school might have given you some. I would suggest doing those first, finishing as many as you can, and then going online for question banks and solution banks, such as those on PMT, so Physics and Maths Tutor, Save My Exams, and Cognito. You might find that some of the question banks are the same, which is fine. Just work through as many as you can, perhaps on Physics and Maths Tutor, because they are free there. And if you are short on time, if you have an exam, for instance, the next day, make sure that you, instead of writing out the whole answer, you read the topic questions and you bullet point what you would say, or you could even just think about what your answer would be for a solid minute or two, and then look at the mark scheme, write down whatever you missed out, and then make sure that you go over whatever you've written down and make sure that you won't miss it, essentially, in the real thing. Another thing I would definitely suggest doing is some full practice papers. They are long. If you're doing Edexcel, for instance, they're 1 hour 45, but just sitting down, getting it done, feeling satisfied when it's done, it's a really useful experience, because you'll be able to understand how timings are allocated for all of the questions, especially if you do struggle with timings like I did when I used to write way too much for the short answer questions. I would suggest to do the practice papers with timings, because it really helps you not waffle on in your answers and not write too little as well. Make sure you are looking at the mark schemes for these papers to see how well you did, and talk to your teacher, your friends, or your tutor for any advice or help on concepts that you still find difficult. Another piece of advice I would definitely give is to ask as many questions as you can in your lessons. It can feel embarrassing and you can feel self-conscious at times, but just make sure that you are clearing up any doubts then and there, because it can really help your revision later on and make it much less of a pain. Just think about the fact that you're not going to talk to most of the people in your class, likely, after like 4 or 5 years. So just go for it, ask as many questions as you want, clear up any doubts, and if you want to, you can just ask the questions after the lesson's over. So I'm going to quickly go over some subject-specific tips. So first, let's start with biology. What I found with biology is that it's very much focused on processes and learning lots of key terms, and you often need to learn the mark schemes. So I would suggest definitely looking at mark schemes for biology and making sure that you understand the processes in detail And if you do have any doubts about even a single stage, make sure you watch videos as your first port of call, looking at notes and going through the strategies that I mentioned before. Moving on to chemistry, there is a lot of maths in chemistry. At least I did Edexcel, and there is a ton of maths. I believe in AQA, there's also lots of maths. Make sure you are familiar with all of the mathematical techniques that you need to use. For example, in molar calculations, empirical formulae, stuff like that. And make sure you know how to do it, because once you know how to do it for one question, you automatically know how to do it for any other question with different numbers. Also, make sure that you memorize certain explanations for chemistry, such as the arrangement, energy, and movement of particles in a solid, liquid, and gas, because they just come up every year pretty much, and there's no need to sort of think about them on the spot in the exam. You can just memorize them, there's not too much to it. As a bonus tip, I would definitely suggest using a revision timetable to track your revision. I would suggest using something like a retrospective revision timetable, which is a more unique but effective approach to tracking your progress when it comes to revision. Here's mine, and let me know in the comments down below if you'd like me to create a video on how to create and use your own. That brings me to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Check out some of my other videos on screen right now. And I'll see you in the next video. Good luck for your exams.